Lovely. So, welcome everyone. So, we are here to figure out what we can do in our tiny forest this winter. And we have our amazing learning senior manager, Sarah, over here. So, and for the ones who don't know me, I'm Divya. I'm the community engagement coordinator for our tiny forest project. And we have a couple of people here who might be new to tiny forest. So, while we wait for others to join, I'll just give a brief overview of Tiny Forest. So basically, we are Earthwatch, we are an environmental charity, and Tiny Forest is one of the projects that we deliver in urban spaces. So as the name suggests, we create tiny forests. So they are made up of 600 trees. So they're usually in the size of a tennis court, but they're very dense, very diverse structurally, as well as in terms of species diversity. They're all native species of trees, canopies, subcanopies, shrubs, and understory. So they're like really complex habitats that are extremely useful for the urban wildlife as well as people. So they create really rich natural spaces where people can just be reconnected with nature. And also we have a lot of citizen science surveys that we conduct in our forest. So we are very thick in citizen science. And a lot of people who are new, you can see other people who are already familiar with the Tiny Forest project over here. So they are our amazing tree keepers. So they are our core group of volunteers. They're basically like the guardians of our tiny forest. They help us keep an eye on the forest. So we have around 160 tiny forests so far. And we are a very small team and we literally cannot manage them on our own. So we heavily depend on our tree keepers to keep an eye on the forest, help us collect important data from the forest, and also help with the maintenance and upkeep of the forest as well. Yeah, I think that's a good quick intro, and then I'll hand it over to Sarah to do her magic.
Thank you, Divya. And yeah, thank you for everyone for sort of giving up a chunk of your kind of early evening. I know it's often sort of really challenging to kind of balance your kind of your day job and your interest in the tiny forest. So we do appreciate it. The aim of this session really was to pull together some ideas about like what can you do in a tiny forest in winter. And I know Divya's been reaching out to tree keepers and those involved in the tiny forest to get an idea about what things we could do, what workshops we could run to kind of help you and inspire you in terms of what you're already doing with a tiny forest. So this is a short presentation to give you some ideas about things that you might do and to kind of hopefully sort of spark a bit of discussion about how that might work in your tiny forests and what other things that you might do. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully, as if by magic, Divya, can you confirm you can see? You can't see a very boring desktop, you can see. Brilliant, thank you. So as Divya already mentioned, I'm just gonna make sure that there we go, that you get the two of us, two for the price of one for this session. So Divya is doing a lot more work on the ground in terms of tiny forests, and I suspect some of you who haven't seen her yet will see her out and about in action at some point soon. I work across a number of different projects in Earthwatch, including tiny forests, but also a project that we've got called Naturehood, which is around other kind of wildlife actions that you can take, particularly in urban spaces. So there's a lot of really nice synergy and overlap between the two projects. And what I've done today is to kind of think about some of the things that you yourself or with the groups of people that you're working with might want to do in your tiny forest. So I've kind of split it into three areas. The idea of kind of enjoying and experiencing the tiny forest, the concept of noticing, learning and recording the tiny forest, and also thinking about kind of acting, engaging and protecting the forest. So I've kind of split the activities into those three areas. So by starting with the enjoying and experiences, this one I was going to throw actually out to those who are here for the session, just to kind of ask at the moment. So how is it, and how do you enjoy your tiny forest at the moment? So what are the kind of things that what takes you to your tiny forest? What is it you enjoy about your tiny forest? Would anybody like to share?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing.
Thanks, Amber.
So the other day we took the kids for the because the weather's been so cold, we wanted to keep them moving. So we've done these sessions so that they were explorers. So we had the magnifying glasses, the binoculars, and we was in and out of the tiny forest looking for bugs, looking at the tree species, seeing what we could find. Like loads of the trees are labelled as well. Numbers, I think it's 0 to 100. So they were trying to find how many they could see and see what was going on there, basically. So yeah, we really enjoyed using it.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's fantastic. I love the fact that actually just having numbers on the trees is such a great challenge, particularly for school groups. It's like, go and find me a number that's got a 5 in it, or go and find me one that's got, that's more than 10. And then off, and it is a great challenge to kind of get.
They automatically created a game. It's like whoever can find the highest number is the winner. So they were just off and they were enjoying themselves. So yeah, they loved it.
God, that sounds great. How about you, Laura? Have you?
Yeah, I was going to say a very similar thing to Amber, actually, is seeing the school groups going out and using their forest. So we've got lots of tiny forests that we're working with in school grounds, but then seeing them as they're putting pictures on Twitter and Facebook and all of these things, with the children going outside and actually experiencing them and seeing how the forest has changed over the winter months has been really lovely. Because it means that that they're enjoying it as well.
Oh, fantastic. And I think that's something I was going to say around the kind of enjoying and experiencing the tiny forest, is thinking about how you're sharing that with other people, either other people within either the school or the other tiny forest tree keepers, the tree keeper Facebook group, but also thinking about it now as a way to kind of whet people's appetite to get them more interested, involved in springtime. So if you can sow the seeds, or is that a mixed metaphor? Can you sow seeds in the trees? You can begin to think about them when you're kind of launching activities in the spring. They're already kind of aware of what you've been doing and how you might get involved. Great to hear about the sort of schools kind of idea. Anyone got any kind of other sort of personal experiences about just how you like to enjoy your tiny forest? Interesting. That's right.
I could go. I mean, I really
like.
I usually visit the one in Oxford. So I think for me, it's about just seeing how tall the trees have grown. So I mean, it's always surprising how quickly the tiny forest grows. So every time I turn up, it's just like a few inches taller, especially in spring and summer. They have like a growth spur, and they're just whoosh. So yeah,
absolutely. I've been lucky to visit a couple of them in Leicester, actually, and even I think there was the space of 2 months, the size difference was, I was like amazed. It's like it's the same forest, but it's grown. So there's something about kind of that sort of regular visiting of the tiny forest that kind of helps you get a sense of it, of literally of it growing and becoming this kind of much bigger entity. Things that we've talked about with other groups before have been kind of thinking about having wildlife walks in your local area, local community, that kind of take in the tiny forest, so it becomes part of your kind of day-to-day kind of walking pattern, so that you as part of that you then get to see it and give yourself permission to kind of see how the tiny forest changes over time. It's also come up recently, I'm not sure if people have come across the idea of sort of green prescribing, but the idea of people being prescribed going for walks as a sort of part of a kind of healthy living. And again, using tiny forests as a bit of a focus for those walks, so giving you an opportunity to go and explore. Obviously, tiny forests are used to kind of meet people. You can use it as an opportunity to meet friends. And I love it when I kind of hear, when you talk about rendezvousing or meeting up for a walk and saying, oh, let's meet at the tiny forest. So it's about, again, planting the sort of seed of the tiny forest as a place to be and a place to go to. One of the other things that I was also thinking about, and again, this is, we're not expecting tree keepers to be sitting avidly every day at the tiny forest scanning to see who's there, but it would be really interesting to, particularly this time of year, to kind of find out who is visiting from a kind of a human population anyway, who is visiting the tiny forest and what is it they're getting out of it. And maybe we could think about having sort of QR codes on the at the fences of a tiny forest. Just, you know, if you visited today, scan this and say, you know, what brought you there, just to get a sense of kind of out of season, what is it, you know, how are people using the sites. So there's lots that people can do in terms of enjoying and experiencing the tiny forest site. And again, as Divya talked about, the joy of the tiny forest is the sort of speed with which things happen and change, and certainly kind of being there and about and noticing what's happening in the tiny forest is really important to people. Which leads me on to, is it gonna work? Is it gonna play? Come on. Is it gonna, ta-da, there we go. It's quite a busy slide, but actually I felt that this is one of the sort of the joys of a tiny forest, is that there is an awful lot to kind of notice, learn and record, whatever time of year you are. You're visiting the tiny forest. It's about being creative, about what you look for and how you look for it. Great to hear from Laura and Amber about the kids getting out there and kind of enjoying it, exploring and discovering what they can find in the tiny forest. And these were just some thoughts that we'd had around things that you could specifically think about in the winter. So a classic one is your winter tree ID skills. Can you tell which the trees are by their kind of buds, by the shape of the actual format of the tree? Are there any kind of sneaky remnants of last year's leaves to give you some clues as to what they might be? And it's a great opportunity to test your ID skills during those kind of cold and winter months. Maybe you'd like to think about making this time of year, making some small signs for a number of the trees, just to kind of say what species they are. I think one of the things that a lot of teachers have found is that tiny forests are a great way just to introduce the students to a number of different native tree species that are kind of literally there on the doorstep for the kids to explore. And the more that they know which the species are, the more hope there is that the youth of today will have a really good understanding of the tree species in the future. Something that I use a lot, and I'm not sure if you do. Oops, a little bit.
I think Karen has just joined. I think you could try muting you.
Let's. Oh,
done.
That's a bit better.
Yeah.
Let me just try. There we go. I have muted people, but I will try and remember to unmute you when I ask a question, because obviously that will be quite difficult. One of the things that I found a really useful tool for recording information is the iNaturalist app. It's a really good way of when you take photos of the trees and the insects or the plants that you see, of getting a reasonably quick ID on what they are. And one of the things that you can do is kind of create your own project, your own group, your own hashtag for your own particular tiny forest. I'm not sure if you can see here, but there is one tiny forest project that has already been contacted, that's created in iNaturalist. And then what you do is you just record the species and you tag them to that project. So it's a really nice way of being part of a local group and seeing what the kind of species people have seen. And winter's a good time to start, because it can only get better as the spring and summer comes on, that you get to see a lot more of what's out there. linked to that is the idea of kind of taking photographs. So either do it, you could do it as a photography competition. So encouraging people to be inspired by winter in the woodland, and think of creative ways that they can take images of the tiny forest site. I think one of the most kind of powerful kind of images this time of year is what the light does. So in terms of creating amazing images of trees and landscapes, but with that amazing light that you get in the winter. And although it is a freezing day today, you do get fantastic light when you get days like this. So maybe getting people to get involved in a photography competition this time of year actually gets them out and gets them looking for things and noticing things that perhaps they wouldn't do normally, if they didn't have that kind of target of taking the perfect photo. And then again, have the photo competition, encouraging people to upload it to Facebook groups or any other community groups to kind of inspire and motivate others to get out there and notice. Also thinking about sort of photographs is, now is a really good time to start taking, if you were interested in recording the changes in seasons and the changes over time in a year of a tiny forest, now is a really good time to start. You know, it's New Year's resolution. Go, you might want to visit the tiny forest every week and take a photo from the same spot every week and really begin to see how it changes over time. And it's one of those things that I would really recommend, because if you do it and then look back on it, it's such a powerful it leaves such a powerful impression of how much a tiny forest changes over time. And it works really well if you then want to kind of work with the school group. Again, often a really powerful way of working with the school children is to show them how it changes by showing photos of things changing over time. And that sort of seasonal change links really well to a lot of work around seasons and habitats that sort of primary school children are involved in, which I think is kind of key stage 3. It's about looking at how things change over time. It sounds like at least one school's been out looking for wildlife and bugs this time of year, and again thinking about some of the science day activities, like looking under the tiles. Really good to explore it in the winter. What's under there in the winter. Obviously, being really careful. You don't want to disturb anything that might be really cold and hunkering down. But again, it's a really nice thing to sort of think about how does that sort of bug population change this time of year compared to later in the year, and what differences might you see. It also links to if you're interested in kind of recording what's going on in the tiny forest on a more regular basis, think about the weather patterns and whether that's having any difference on what happens to the tiny forest this season. I don't know about everyone else on the call, but there's been some kind of phenomenal changes in terms of rainfall, in terms of fluctuating temperature, and again being able to kind of capture and record some of those things as the year goes on. It will be interesting to see whether the particularly soggy December and February and the cold snap earlier in the year has had any impact on what happens to tree growth this year. So for those of you who are maybe in years 2 or 3 of the tiny forests, can we look at any patterns between the sort of winter spring months and the carbon data that we capture, or the pollinator data that we capture? Is that likely to have any link to that? So it's a great time of year to be really thinking about some of those other questions and things that you might want to start introducing into what you look for when you're out and about in your tiny forest. And the other classic was, I think, was it Laura or Amber who talked about looking for it might have been Tivia, looking for the tallest tree is one of the classics. But the other one is to get people out and about spotting like the first buds, the first leaf buds. So if you are visiting the tree on the forest on a regular basis, have a look around to see where the first buds are coming up, and which tree it is. And that would be really lovely data to share on the Treekeeper Facebook page, if we can get a sense of whether, I would guess the logic would be that it would there'd be a great march from the from the tiny forest in the south going north as the temperatures change, but it might not be. It would be really interesting to kind of see what changes over time. And then the final kind of thing that I thought was a really interesting thing to think about this time of year was if it's safe to have a trail camera in your tiny forest. So potentially some of the school ones are more secure than others. But there's been some fantastic images of wildlife using tiny forests. Like in the middle of the winter, it's really easy to go, oh no, there's no wildlife about. You know, the trees haven't grown. There isn't much in the way of plants at the moment. So no, there's not much happening. And then you put a trail cam into a tiny forest, and suddenly it's a hive of activity at night in terms of being used. So again, there's some kind of creative things that you can do, and if you do record some amazing things that are kind of using the tiny forest at night, having some of those trail camera images can be really emotive if you want to get people involved in becoming a tree keeper or coming along to some of the science days, because you can demonstrate how important and how valuable the site is for wildlife, even if you can't always see that wildlife in the first place. Are there any other kind of approaches that people have used, I guess slightly out of the sort of spring summer kind of season, to kind of get out and record and notice things in the tiny forest? What are the kind of things that people are interested in looking for?
We have one in the chat from Karen. So she said they did tree twinning last week. So finding a tree the same height as us. So that's an amazing idea.
That's a brilliant one. Yes, I like that one. And also, I'm not sure if it's always possible when the tree planting itself takes place, but often people get quite attached to the tree that they planted. Some of them have been named, and then people will keep going back to their special tree to keep an eye on that as well. So yeah, that's another lovely one in terms of kind of matching it up, having a favourite tree, and watching how that one kind of changes over time.
And I think in Facebook, I just saw that Emily had posted a first catkin in her forest.
I see, it's already started.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other ideas that you guys would want to share?
No other ideas, but I'm excited to try some of those with the children at least.
Yay.
That's what we like. I'm relying on you to pick up on any questions in chat, Divya, as in
yeah on it.
It's disappeared from my ability to look at here. That's great. And I think, you know, if people are trying these different activities, it'd be great if you could share them in the Facebook group or feedback to Divya, so we can kind of get a sense of how it's being used, and obviously if you come up with a great new idea, please share it. One of the images on this slide is there's a couple of different ones which are around like creating your own kind of nature and wildlife map. So thinking about having the tiny forest as the center of your kind of wildlife world, which obviously is, and then thinking about your local area and other green spaces that might kind of map into that. And we found a number of community groups have really enjoyed creating those kind of nature maps, thinking back to the idea of going on wildlife walks, having a kind of map to go to take in a number of different nature sites, the tiny forest being one of them, is just a really nice way to promote it. I think there's a couple of images in here. One was we worked with a community who had an amazing artist within the community, so absolutely loved drawing all the pictures of wildlife to look for, and it was very much a kind of hand-drawn wildlife map. But equally, you can create an effective visual map like the sort of the green and orangey blobby looking one on this slide, you know, that just basically kind of highlights where the bits of wildlife are and the places that you can go to. And that works really well in schools, but equally, if you're trying to encourage people in the community to visit the site, if you're providing a nature and wildlife map of the area, that's absolutely brilliant in terms of what people want, and you can kind of get your tiny forest on the map quite literally, and get people out and about to visit. Now this is the Is it going to work? Moving on. Moving on. Yes, there we go. And then the next thing is really thinking about like practical things that you can do. So the kind of recording and the monitoring and the exploring and the understanding what you've got is a key part of what Tiny Forests are all about. And Divya mentioned at the very beginning the importance and the joy of citizen science and kind of noticing and recording the nature that we have. But there's also loads of other kind of practical activities that can happen in a tiny forest, some of which are just crying out to kind of happen this time of year. So the very dully named maintenance is actually basically it's the downtime for the kind of wildlife growing, but potentially the uptime for all the kind of the upkeep and the it's horrible, the infrastructure of the tiny forest also needs looking after. So thinking about fences, thinking about the tags, thinking about the notice board and the benches and all the things that are kind of used there. Now's the time to give it some TLC. Divya supplied these great photos of a replaced notice board. There's the joy of wood. Any kind of anything that involves wood in the ground will always have a certain level of wood rot, and there'll be a kind of natural turnover of things to be replaced. And I think in this case, Divya, they were really happy to replace it and approached you for the notice board, and we supplied them with, we paid them for things that they'd used.
Yeah, I think, but unfortunately it was the board that was like kicked in and broken. So it was a case of vandalism. So not a good story to start off with, but it was a good ending. I mean,
yeah,
they had a great day, and yeah, they worked there all day putting in the signs and installing. And yes, we'll definitely can reimburse the cost of replacing these things and yeah, helping with the maintenance and stuff. Yeah.
I think you also had did you have a top tip from a group who've been looking after the benches in the tiny forest?
Yeah, so our tree keepers in Norman Park, this is in Hammersmith and Fulham in London. So they have been experimenting using boiled linseed oil to coat the benches just to, increase their longevity and, prevent wear and tear. So yeah, these are some of the things that you could take up in the forest. And sometimes, like if the fence has kind of leaned or fallen across, that I think Ian did that in his forest as well in Crewe. So just, using some wire to tie it up, straighten it up. And it also deters the vandals in the sense, they know that the community is taking care of the forest. There is someone who is always looking after it. And, that sends across a positive message that, it's been looked after and there are people taking care of it. And that might encourage more people to come and use the forest as well.
Definitely. And I think because in some ways the tiny forest is a bit more exposed this time of year, it's not as full and forest-like. Yeah. And by being there and repairing the kind of the fences and the notice board, it definitely shows that it's still being loved for and cared for by people in the community. The other thing that we've been kind of looking at and experimenting with is kind of things that you can do, improvements that you can do kind of around the tiny forest that will kind of basically support the biodiversity within the forest itself, but also help with what we've just talked about in terms of pride in the site, to make it kind of visually appealing, to make people kind of see that it's used and that it's a nice place to be. So we've had some people do bulb planting events, so slightly it was before Christmas that it happened, ready for sort of spring bulbs, and you can put these kind of around the outside of the forest. Now obviously one of the biggest challenges is like who owns the land around the forest and how is it currently used, and you might have to have various conversations with people to try and work out what's possible and what isn't. But where it's been on sort of council-owned land or very friendly landowner land, planting the bulbs has worked really well. Equally, kind of swathes of area around the tiny forest that we've put wildflower seeds in to kind of improve the wildlife outside. And sometimes it's a case of just working out who's responsible for grounds maintenance around the tiny forest site, and maybe encouraging them not to mow quite so close to the tiny forest, maybe to leave a metre buffer around, just to kind of let the wildflowers grow up. So there's lots that you can do if you get to know your kind of local landowners and what they're doing. And definitely keep the tiny forest team posted, so that they know if you're doing all this amazing bulb planting and wildflower planting, and then the pollinator survey goes through the roof this summer, then it would be really good to kind of tie that into stuff that you've been doing around.
Amazing. And if you want help connecting with your local councils, you can always reach out to us, and we'll make sure that you're connected, so we can get all those things in order as well.
Brilliant. And then the other thing that we found has been really sort of popular this time of year is kind of making spaces, making places for wildlife. So stuff that you can do away from the tiny forest site, but can kind of bring back to either the tiny forest site or the area around a tiny forest. So making things like bug boxes or bird boxes to go on nearby trees or houses, thinking about whether you can create some habitat piles in corners of the forest, building hedgehog homes, those kind of things. So they're a really good way of bringing together people in the community to have a go at stuff. We've run them as sort of Saturday sessions, so people will come along and have a go at making things. We've run them in school groups. I find they work really well with sort of scouts groups, guide groups, that kind of thing. So it's a kind of practical thing that they can do. Having it, particularly things like bird boxes or bug boxes, and then they get the choice of kind of taking them home, so kind of being inspired by the tiny forest but improving their own gardens for wildlife, and then kind of having a few that they then put in the sort of tiny forest or around the tiny forest area to improve it. Thinking of the kind of the hedgehog one of the I don't know if any of the school groups have done it, but putting out hedgehog tunnels just to see what wildlife is using the site, and they're kind of footprint tunnels, and you can pop them in the tiny forest and then see if you get any footprints of what kind of animals have used them. And often what we've done is use that as a starting point to see what kind of animals are using the site, and then decide whether you want to make any particular wildlife homes to go with that. So again, there's loads of resources out there in terms of design, in terms of sourcing them. A lot of these things, if you have people in your tiny forest treekeeper group who are keen carpenters or who like building things, generally there's always someone in a group who likes to build things. Then this is a perfect activity to kind of get people very much hands-on and involved. And again, thinking about stuff that you can get up and about to raise the profile of the tiny forest and getting involved in it in the future. I was just wondering, so Laura is from the council side, so is that some like an input that we can take from her to see if how the council might encourage these activities, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's really nice being able to sit on this call and gain an understanding of what sort of things are already happening, because I'm conscious we've got, by the end of this planting, we're going to have 20 tiny forests across Leicester. Yes. In schools, so it's really important that we're then making sure they're actually being used effectively and that the schools are making the most of them. So trying to like pairing up schools with the community groups, as you were saying, sort of building different resources and then taking that learning home as well is something that I think we will really effectively be able to foster, hopefully, following this sort of inspiration and things. Yeah, definitely, it's really exciting.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
Yeah,
I think that idea of kind of having kind of collective activities that are focused on the tiny forest, but actually people can go, oh, actually I could do this at home, or I can take what I've learned here and put it into practice in my own garden or my or my own windowsill or whatever. I can kind of look at how I can kind of make those improvements. And then the other thing this time of year is just to think about planning. So just think about what are the things that you want to see happening in your tiny forest this coming season. What kind of things do you think the community would like to see? how might you ask them about what they'd like to get involved in? What kind of activities can you start thinking about that would really get people engaged and involved? If you're lucky, within a kind of a close kind of area to your tiny forest, there may be some kind of summer activities or wildlife days that already happen, that you can kind of just go with your tree keeper branding, and encourage people to come and visit the tiny forest site. But equally, you might want to think about, particularly as your forest grows, you know, would you like to run an event or an activity at your site in the summer, either as part of the kind of the science day, or as just kind of celebrating the forest and everything that's in it. Particularly if you've got some of the activities you've already had a go at, like the find a tree that's the same height as you. You know, getting people to test their tree ID skills is always interesting, because people go, oh yeah, I know trees, and go, okay, well, what's this one? Or find me 4 different trees, and then have a go at understanding what they are. So it's a great sort of chance to kind of regroup and think about what activities you might want to get people involved with later in the year, and maybe have a strategy about how you're going to promote the next science day, or how you might reach out and encourage other groups to come and use the sites. Where you've got tiny forests that are based at the same sites as schools, you've got an absolute in with kind of young people coming and using the sites regularly. But if your tiny forest isn't directly connected to a school, what are the other kind of interests and activities that will bring people in? And maybe use this as a chance, particularly to see who is using the site, and asking what they'd like to see when they came back. That is me done with the slidey bit. Is there anybody thinking about those kind of practical kind of activities that you can do for both kind of wildlife and for maintenance? Are there any other things that that people would like to see, or any activities that you've had a go at in action? So Ian, you're up in Crewe, I think. What how old is your tiny forest?
It was only planted last winter, so it's not very exciting at the moment. But some of the trees have grown quite well.
And another fun fact is that it was planted in the storm, and Ian was the only volunteer who actually braved the storms and planted the tiny forest alongside Ben. So yeah, it was one of those landmark tiny forests where we say that, oh, we plant in all weather conditions, and we actually did. Isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm planning to go and have a look at the fence, because I think that needs a bit of work on it. So.
And I think, Ian, there is also an active Good Gym group in Crewe who have previously done some litter picking and weeding in the site. So maybe I could connect you with them, so you have like a bigger bunch that you could go with.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing that we're kind of looking at exploring at the moment are how those people doing their Duke of Edinburgh award, the community element, might connect in with tiny forests. What could that look like, and what support can we give to tree keepers to help with that? There's a real kind of challenge, I think, sometimes with working with young people like that, in terms of responsibility and one-to-one working. But I think we've been my son's been involved in doing some sort of project work locally around here, and he's kind of very self-contained and does his own thing, and that's fine, and we kind of report back in. So there are kind of opportunities to kind of reach out to other groups to get involved, and we are Divya and I are kind of exploring what ways they might be. So if there are particular types of kind of community groups that you're working with, and it's going really well, do share your secrets with us, so we can kind of share the love between kind of other groups. There's various, like the National Citizen Service, and there's various other things that we're looking at the moment to see what could a tiny forest do for those kind of community groups, and why might they get involved. So it would be really great to hear if any of you have had success with any other particular types of groups and getting them involved in some of these activities.
Yeah, and also like you could invite your local scouts and guides group to use the forest. So definitely like use it as a venue. And I think with the Good Gym crew, they used it as a place to do meditation. So like, meet up at the forest, do a round of meditation, and then go around for their runs and jogs. So yeah, like, I mean, I think a lot of things, I mean, yeah, using it as a venue is a good way to look at it as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really effective has been where a scout group has had a session kind of this time of year in a tiny forest, where you're like basically going, it's a lot of twigs. It's not a forest. It's twigs surrounded by a fence. But then encouraging them to come back in the summer, late summer, where they go, wow, where did all these trees come from? And it is that kind of putting it into perspective. And with a lot of sort of scouts group, there are a number of their badges that are very much connected to either community impact or their kind of naturalist badge, where they need to understand and get to know various different habitats. So it's a win-win in terms of getting people active and interested. And then hopefully they tell their parents who go, oh, I must visit the tiny forest, and then they'll come back as well.
Absolutely. Any other questions or suggestions?
Again, sorry, not a suggestion, but yeah, if there is any sort of success stories in terms of getting people to come and support with the forest, obviously we would be really keen to see that model working for the forests in Leicester. It's a little bit different because they're on school sites, but I know lots of the schools would be keen, especially when you started to talk about sort of DFE and scout groups. I think that's the sort of thing that we'd really be able to promote within the schools, and some of them are already in, like secondary schools who are potentially offering DFE. So again, if you've got any sort of examples of where that's worked, that would be something really good that we could promote to the schools and sort of explain that that's something that they can be considering.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, where you've got a secondary school that is already connected, it seems like a really good fit to kind of get people involved.
Yeah. And also getting those secondary school kids down to sort of the primary school spaces as well, because they could help having a look at that. But then it's also good for the primary school students to sort of see them and interact. And then on a selfish point, I'm also a scout leader, so I'm very excited to be able to take the scout group around. There's one in Loughborough that
I'm a scout leader too, Laura, so I know. I always look for opportunities to kind of weave scouting into it in some way.
No, that sounds fantastic. Definitely get on board with that.
Yeah, and another thing I'm trying to explore is trying to get the local elderly groups as well to use the forest. So we have one tree keeper who works with Age UK, who takes well-being groups to the local parks. So we're trying to explore if we could engage them in the tiny forest with, if for the ones who have accessibility issues, then maybe just visiting the forest, but the others who do want to get their hands dirty to help out with a little bit of weeding, connecting with soil and, handling the plants and just connecting and being with nature in natural spaces. So that is something that you could try out with your local groups as well, I guess. So and
that also provides a great intergenerational piece. So if you get some of the elderly well-being walking groups visiting and connecting in with the primary school kids, then you've got that wonderful kind of overlap of ages and generations.
Brilliant. Yeah, I do like that idea. Yeah, intergenerational alleviation of climate change. I like that. And I think we're also trying to connect with the global hub. So they're basically young people who are trying to figure out ways for other young people to take climate action. So trying to see if they can get involved. So that's another way. And it also, adds value to their CVs as well, because, conducting these citizen science activities, collecting data, and all these can add up to the skills that they can showcase in other workspaces as well, like later on. So it would be a good value add in terms of upskilling themselves as well, I would say. And
I was going to say one of the other kind of things that is on our list of things to explore, Laura, is looking at how a tiny forest could be used by A-level geography students as part of their project work. So we were looking at mapping the A-level geography curriculum against what you would do at a tiny forest. And there's a lot of, I mean, as a bare minimum, there's so many projects around kind of carbon capture and kind of carbon calculations and soil quality, so it would just be absolutely spot on. And then just think about all the amazing data that you would have for your forest if you've got 42 A-level geography students doing a project. So again, that's another good way in, I think, of really using the tiny forest as a great resource.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that sounds fantastic. I'm sure lots of schools would be on board with that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Like cool project that can, and especially having like 10 to 15 tiny forests in the school, so you'll have like a good comparative study as well over there. Yeah. And on that note, I just wanted to mention that our tiny forest monitoring report will be released soon. So that is for the 2022 monitoring season. So, and we have got amazing results. So yeah, just watch out for emails from me. So I'll be sending the report across hopefully the end of this year, maybe. So yeah, that could be a good way to showcase people, the power of citizen science and what that their data is actually used by our scientists, and they can actually influence policy level decisions by contributing to research like this. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out for that. And I have also popped in the Tiny Forest calendar in the chat. So Sarah was mentioning about the national and international days that you could celebrate in your tiny forest. So we have those listed in the calendar. So you can start planning, as she said, for the rest of the year and see what else you can be doing in your forest.
Never sleep on a tiny forest. There's always things that you can do.
Any other pressing questions? Or Anthony, if you're able to speak and if you have any questions about tiny forest, because you're very new to the whole project, so yeah, you can either catch up with me. I'll send you an email later on with more details about tiny forest, and we could figure out the closest tiny forest closest to you, and then we can see how if you would like to get involved, and yeah, I can send more information as well. Anything else? If anything else comes up, you know where to find us. So and yeah, via the Tiny Forest email ID, I can always make my way to Sarah or other team members and get you the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, between us, we can usually work out the answers. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining. This will be available for you to review and replay at your leisure, and hopefully by sort of tomorrow we can kind of upload it and share it. Again, as Divya said, any questions or any ideas, please kind of reach out and let us know. And we'll try and make as many of these kind of ideas where we've got examples and resources available out as kind of being inspiring, really, to try and get more people interested and engaged in the tiny forest. So hopefully now you know that there's always something to do in tiny forest, even in the winter. And if there's anything else that comes up in terms of the work that you're doing as a tree keeper or with the work that you're doing within the schools, do let us know if there's any other different types of webinars or workshops or discussions that you'd like to have. So yeah, thank you all for joining, and have a good rest of the evening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both of you.
Lovely.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
See you.